everyone! So today's video is going to be about a topic that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is the idea that what is good for the market is good for society. And I know that you may think this sounds like a rather dull topic, or one that doesn't merit great amounts of reflection, but I assure you that I mean, in my opinion, it's very interesting. And I think that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily see it as a topic worthy of a lot of investigation just because it's sort of seen as this universal truth. Like, obviously what's good for the market is good for society. It's going to create growth and jobs, and why wouldn't we want that? But yeah, so I just wanted to deconstruct that idea a little bit more with you, notably because it doesn't only govern spheres of life that are explicitly economic, like the free market, or even like consumerism or things like that, things that we think about as distinctly economic domains, right? It really has come to reshape the way that we think about ourselves and our own place in the world, and also the place of everyone else around us. So yeah, that we're going to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, this assumption is kind of the fundamental bedrock of neoliberalism. So quick background on the ideological roots of neoliberalism. Well, as its prefix neo, which means new, suggests, it is a adaptation of classical liberal theory, which originated in the 1800s. And it's a school of thought that drew heavily from Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, which he wrote in 1776. You might have heard of it. It was a hugely influential book. So the core belief that was outlined in Adam Smith's book, and that really animated his entire view of the economy, was that human nature was inherently selfish and self-interested, and that individuals are always driven to act according to their self-interest. Insofar as humans are hardwired to fend only for themselves, society is only ever the sum of its parts of totally independent actors. So from that view, it naturally follows that what we should be opting for is a system which allows all of us to pursue our own self-interest in a way that will maximize the common good. It's the idea that all of our desires will balance themselves out, and that by pursuing our self-interest we'll come to some sort of equilibrium. It's also the idea that social production can be sought through individual consumption, that the market is the key actor through which good outcomes are to be sought, right? Because it only responds to, hypothetically, it only responds to the laws of supply and demand. Commodities are naturally going to price themselves according to how much they're needed in society. And then in come classical liberals a few decades later and sort of pushed this ideology even further. Unlike Adam Smith, who didn't actually think that every service should be thought of as a commodity, classical liberal theorists did. So neoliberalism, which is the era that we find ourselves in now, is basically the extension of classical liberal principles magnified times a million. So under neoliberalism, market ideology extends past commodities into every sphere of life. There's sort of two main ways of understanding neoliberalism, and they're very complementary to each other. But the first is sort of the more standard view that of neoliberalism as a set of structural economic policies spearheaded by Reagan and Thatcher in the 1970s and disseminated through global institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank. This worldview held that the economic crisis of the 1970s was the fault of the government, that through excessive regulations, the government was suffocating the economy, and that really we should be aiming to make the market as free as possible. That all public spheres now should be privatized and subject to the same laws as everyone else, as every other business. Privatization was done by the deregulation of banks and the integration of world economies, and also the introduction of a lot of fiscal austerity measures. So the result of that in the US, for example, where the neoliberal experiment was really pushed to the extreme, is that all institutions were dismantled and then reconstructed through this corporate lens. So everything should become a market. Definitely education and healthcare and housing, but also law and order, right? Prisons, Even NGOs, to a certain extent, are now run like companies with CEOs, and they're subject to the laws of like best practices. Essentially, these spheres should abide by the same exact laws as other business and should withstand the test of predatory finance. And this is all in the name of competition and deregulation and like human freedom and choice. But okay, what I really wanted to talk about in this video is how neoliberalism and this idea that what is good for the market is automatically good for society, how it's really reshaped our understanding of ourselves. Neoliberal rationale saturates everything and everyone with an economizable value, so that really the only purpose of life becomes to increase that value. It's pretty tragically ironic that markets were originally seen as good because they were thought to respond to human nature and human behavior, whereas now it's pretty much universally accepted that our duty as humans is to respond to markets. Under neoliberalism, we are reconfigured as pieces of human capital that really must develop the right skill at the right time in the right place in order to respond to market demands. And remember, since the mandate is to privatize everything so that it is a for-profit corporation, humans are no exception to that. So meet your new life purpose, which is to be an entrepreneur of the self and really think about running your life like a successful business. Now, doesn't that sound appealing? Sadly enough, I feel like we've sort of convinced ourselves that it is, and that we somehow chose this. Now, the really important questions become, what is my brand, and how do I brand myself to be a valuable asset? What skills should I develop to be in line with market demand? What is my pitch to sell myself to employers? How can I invest my time to be as productive as possible? I mean, after all, time is money. What markers can I use to really maximize my output and my efficiency? I mean, everything we do at this point can and should be weighed according to how much it's going to increase your human capital. So like what sports we choose to play and what community service activities we choose to do, or like what majors we choose in college, and what skills we develop in order to like be the best market assets that we can be. And even social media takes this to a whole new level where our literal person is reconstituted by and through this bizarre digital valuation system that lets us know how relevant we are and how much we are worth. And we know that social media capital doesn't just carry virtual weight, it also serves as a real measure of how monetizable you are, like how advertiser friendly your content is and how much you can push others to consume, which is always the mantra. And since everything we are and everything we do is to be economizable, it's also rateable and rankable. We are able to measure and track even our most basic vital functions at this point, and even our basic daily habits, like how many steps we take and how many hours we sleep and how many calories we eat. There's an interesting contradiction because neoliberalism has really objectified the living with this corporate rhetoric, but it's simultaneously really humanized and personified the market in pretty baffling new ways. So, I mean, the first obvious thing is that corporations are now legal persons, right? And they have certain rights, like the right to sue and the right to like maintain their personal interests. But we also, even in the way that we talk about the market and the way that we talk about its health and its pulse, its mood, reminds us that the market is the subject and that we are the object. In a sense, it recasts states and people as just slaves of the economy who live by and for market demand. Ultimately, since the market is the main actor through which we should seek good outcomes, since it is some sort of impartial, rational, benevolent force, it makes sense that our duty as good citizens is to be good market actors, right? It's to help fuel the growth and the health of the economy. And I think we've internalized that rhetoric so much, at least I really see it around me, just like people being riddled with guilt for having debt or for not having a job that pays them well. It's, I think that we've internalized this rhetoric that if we're not being productive, if we're not being good market assets, then we're being a drag on society. And since we're being a drag on society, then we're legitimately disposable. I think this view is epitomized in the fact that we see very wealthy people as inherently good, right? It's this whole myth of the trickle-down economy that they're creating jobs, when really what they've done is just profit tremendously off of the labor exploitation of others. And in the same way, we see people who are poor and who kind of failed at being self-entrepreneurs as sort of legitimately in that position, because if you're being a drag on the economy, since the economy is seen as this good, fair thing, then you're weighing all of us down, you know? It's amazing, isn't it, that we've been so brainwashed that the goal of our lives is to increase our worth as market actors, that we now like police ourselves with this ideology. And I find myself fighting the urge to like believe in this theory all the time. And even just, I think about like my college experience now and going to the career center and them just like, it was all about like finding my pitch and finding my brand and how I was going to sell myself to employers and how I was going to like make them want to hire me because I was a profitable asset in 30 seconds and just all the goddamn time. So anyway, if you want to learn more about everything that I talked about, I'm going to link a bunch of sources in the description box. Obviously, I did not come up with all this myself, and yeah, it's through reading people like Marx and like Michel Foucault. And recently I've read this book, Undoing the Demos, Neoliberalism, Stealth Revolution by Wendy Brown, and it just has been making me think a lot. So I also have a lot of thoughts related to this and veganism, because as I was reading this, I was like, okay, so basically what she's saying is that humans have now become market commodities, and they've basically just become animals, like what animals have already been for like 10,000 years in our economy, by like normalizing the fact that we're only as valuable as like our bodies and our labor is for the market. So maybe I'll make another video about that too. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Sorry I haven't made a video in a little while. I've been super busy and I moved too. So please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.